Shock the world. America bets on Africa's future, America's promise in Africa. Welcome to Eagle News Channel. The second United States-Africa Summit kicked off on December 13th in Washington, District of Columbia, USA, with a red carpet welcome for the 49 leaders of African nations and the African Union, AU. The summit is scheduled to last for 3 days. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, there hasn't been a larger international gathering held in the nation's capital than the one that's about to take place. As was to be anticipated, the primary topics of conversation between the leaders of the United States and African countries were the COVID-19 outbreak, trade, the consequences of the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, and climate change. Mr. Joe Biden will give a speech at the Africa-America Business Forum, take part in joint sessions, meet in smaller groups with leaders, and host a dinner at the White House as part of his participation in the forum. After years of disregarding other priorities, on December 14th the United States signed a trade deal to deepen connections with Africa. This came as China increasingly expanded its influence in the region, especially in the fields of investment and trade. During a meeting in Washington, D.C., which was attended by African leaders from 49 countries and the African Union, Vice President Joe Biden of the United States of America made the following statement: "America will bet on the future of Africa." In the light of growing competition between the United States and China, the summit, together with the declarations made by Vice President Joe Biden, intends to position countries in the African region as vital partners of the United States. More drastic. Now, China is seeking to increase its influence in the region by offering assistance for the construction of various types of infrastructure. The entire amount of money exchanged in commerce between China and African nations has recently surpassed that of the United States by a factor of 4. Beijing is also a significant creditor for the region, frequently providing loans that are more easily accessible and on more favorable terms than the West does. Joe Biden, the Vice President of the United States, has stated that a new agreement with the African Continental Free Trade Area would provide American businesses with access to a market that might contain as many as 1.3 billion consumers and be valued as much as $3.04 trillion. Even though it was taking place within the confines of the conference, a number of corporations from the United States, including General Electric Company, G.N., and Cisco Systems Incorporated, CSCO.O., signed investment cooperation agreements. When Africa succeeds, so does the United States of America. Sincerity dictates that every nation and people on Earth will achieve their goals, Biden stated. During the conference, the government of President Joe Biden made a commitment to invest $55 billion in order to foster partnerships with African countries on a variety of topics, including food security, climate change, and commerce. A different subject. In addition, Mr. Biden stated that he is in favor of the African Union being accepted as a permanent member of the group of 20 major economies, G20. This is the first summit between the United States and African nations since a meeting of a comparable nature took place in 2014 under the administration of former President Barack Obama. In addition, Vice President Joe Biden met with the heads of state of various nations, including Gabon and Liberia, to discuss the upcoming elections in those countries in 2023. These meetings took place on the sidelines of the summit. Mr. and Prime Minister Aziza Kanak of Morocco watched the 2022 World Cup semi-final match between France and Morocco. Morocco is the first country from Africa to go to the semi-finals of the most renowned tournament on the planet. The United States and several African countries are working to improve their relationship, and this summit is a part of that effort. China has been holding high-level discussions with African leaders on a regular basis for more than 20 years now, and these summits take place every 3 years. Some U.S. officials saw the meeting as a fight for influence between the world's 2 greatest economies in Africa, and they believe that this competition will take place at the summit. However, Vice President Biden did not mention China in his speech, and the government of the United States has downplayed criticism of Chinese loans and investments in infrastructure projects in the United States. The United States Trade Representative, Catherine Tai, stated on December 13, while exchanging partners in the African region, that the United States is now considering revisiting its trade incentive programs in order to boost investment in the region's area. In a statement that was made public, John Kirby, a spokesman for the United States National Security Council, emphasized the significance of investments made by the United States in the African market. He also stated that the United States plans to engage in a two-way discussion on trade, investment, and economic growth opportunities. The strategy taken by the U.S. administration was praised by African leaders. It has been suggested that rather than exporting commodities, the United States should look for chances to invest. The United States side possesses the necessary machines and methods, hence, we should move production to Africa in order to satisfy demand on the African market, declared Kenyan President William Ruto. According to President Ruto, who cited growth projections, the value of Africa's agribusiness sector is expected to more than treble by the year 2030 and reach $1 trillion. In addition to this, he asserted that investment from the United States has the potential to assist in the reduction of Africa's budget deficit as well as the continent's dearth of high-quality infrastructure, thereby serving as a driving force behind development in this region. The trade volume between China and Africa reached $254 billion, which is far higher than the $64.3 billion that was traded between the United States and Africa. The analysis was conducted by the Eurasia Group. In the year 2002, those figures came in at a meager $12 billion and $21 billion, respectively. The leaders of the West have been very vocal in their harsh criticism of China's debt traps, which have put a large number of African nations in a position where they are facing rising debts. However, the Chinese envoy to the United States refuted the allegation and pointed out that the debts owed by African nations to Western nations are even 3 times as much as what China owes. In light of the intensifying rivalry between the United States of America and China in the African continent, Ethiopia's ambassador to the United Nations Atske Selassie Amdi made the following points clear: each of these countries is just as vital to the development of Africa as the other. Each nation in the region will define the nature of its interaction with others in the region depending on the national interests that it prioritizes. America's promise in Africa. In this light, the United States-Africa Summit presents Vice President Joe Biden with an opportunity to show that Washington is serious about its connections with the African continent. At the same time, this presents an opportunity for the United States to fulfill the commitment it made to Africa in the new strategy for sub-Saharan Africa, which was announced during the trip to Africa made by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in August 2022, as well as in the United States National Security Strategy, NSS, which was introduced in October 2022. On the eve of the summit, the United States made an announcement that it was prepared to invest $55 billion on Africa over the course of 3 years in order to battle climate change, improve healthcare systems, and ensure that all countries are included. Africa. At the same day, Vice President Joe Biden made an announcement that he backed the African Union's bid to become a permanent member of the group of leading established and emerging economies, G20. This acknowledges the significant role that the continent plays in the global economy. Global Educational Institution in particular, he will take part in a session that focuses on boosting food security and food system resilience in the context of Africa being severely impacted by rising food prices as a direct result of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Nevertheless, despite the efforts of the U.S., there are still certain obstacles in the way of the two parties working together. To begin, the majority of African nations are exercising extreme caution in light of the crisis in Ukraine. The United States of America has been quite vocal about its disapproval of a number of African nations' electoral processes and human rights records. These nations most certainly do not want to be put in a position where they have to pick between receiving benevolent investments from China or receiving new aid packages from the United States. A more in-depth examination of these subjects may have a detrimental effect on the cooperation that exists between Washington and African nations. Officials from the United States stated that Mr. Biden did not openly underline differences about the subject given the circumstances. Molly Fee, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, gave a speech in advance of the summit in which she stated that the United States would avoid repeating the mistakes that were made during the time of the Cold War and colonialism. However, putting this pledge into action in a way that is beneficial to both the United States and Africa to the greatest extent possible is not a straightforward challenge for the administration of Vice President Joe Biden. Support the channel by like and share the video. Don't forget to press the subscribe button and the bell to receive the latest news. Thank you for watching.